Morgan Stanley fighting against giving the victims their money back. Scott Cohn has a CNBC investigation.
You were about to hear a bald-faced lie.
How do we know it's not a Ponzi scheme?
It's not. I mean, the money's there.
It is a Ponzi scheme, and the money is not there.
Sean, why'd you steal all the money?
Well, thank you. Have a good day.
That's Sean Good, sentenced in May to 7 years in federal prison for running a $7 million scam while he was a financial advisor for Morgan Stanley here at the firm's branch in Wilmington, North Carolina.
You sorry at all for what you did?
Thank you. Have a good day.
Caitlin Andrews, who recorded that phone call, was his biggest victim, losing pretty much everything she had, more than $1.5 million.
It feels violating. It's not so much that I hate him or am angry at him. I'm more just sort of standing here an open wound.
She says she planned to use the money from a divorce settlement to raise her 2 sons.
You stole from your boys.
That's the worst part.
Andrews says she saw no reason not to trust Good, who was already handling her mother's accounts.
He just seemed really invested in our family. Just seemed very trustworthy and friendly. Well, and that he worked for Morgan Stanley.
Good would later admit that a Morgan Stanley product was at the heart of his fraud. Known as a liquidity access line of credit, the firm pitched it in videos like this as a way for clients to borrow against their portfolios.
Access the cash you need to fund your goals with the strength of Morgan Stanley behind you.
She was to transfer the money from her line of credit to him as her financial advisor.
It was no risk, high yield, short-term bonds.
Instead, Sean Good was stealing the money.
Sean Good spent that money to prop up a lavish lifestyle.
European vacations, fancy cars, $800,000 in credit card bills.
So effectively, Morgan Stanley is lending money to the victims of this scheme, and that money then gets diverted into Sean Good's pocket.
All of it undetected by Morgan Stanley, America's 6th largest brokerage firm, for 10 years.
They should have detected it and prevented it at the outset.
Lou Straney is a 43-year veteran of the securities industry who consults on arbitration cases but is not involved with this one.
The key here is the red flags very early on. As a supervisor, you're looking at the advisors that work for you and determine whether or not their lifestyle matches their income.
Morgan Stanley declined our request for an interview. In a statement, a spokesperson said after discovering Mr. Good's fraud, he was promptly terminated from Morgan Stanley, that the firm is cooperating fully with law enforcement and working with counsel for Morgan Stanley clients to address their claims. Except it wasn't Morgan Stanley that discovered the fraud.
Talk to us at all about the sentence? About Morgan Stanley?
Law enforcement sources say it was investigators from the IRS and the state. They were looking into Good's finances. Caitlin Andrews and the other victims heard it from them.
I want my money, and I want it in my hands.
That's when she decided to confront Good and get it on tape.
I have 2 boys. I am their only parent. This is all of my money, and you took it.
And you have it all. Caitlin, you have it all. We will get it all transferred back. If you go to, listen, this has been done outside Morgan Stanley, I'm well aware of that. And if they go to Morgan Stanley, they will fire me. I mean, I will lose my job.
It's a key to his scam, investigators say, keeping calls and emails on his personal accounts. The SEC says communicating like that violates record-keeping laws, a path for fraud. And for Morgan Stanley, it's not the first time. Last year, it paid a $125 million penalty to the SEC for off-channel communications and failure to reasonably supervise its employees in an industry crackdown that began in 2021. Sean Good pleaded guilty to fraud and money laundering. At his sentencing in May, he said there's no excuse for what he did, that the guilt and remorse is overwhelming. Caitlin Andrews was there, so were other victims. But not in court, nowhere near it, was anyone from Morgan Stanley.
It doesn't surprise me that a person, a financial advisor, would steal money because there are bad people. What did surprise me is that a corporate entity as big and rich and powerful as Morgan Stanley wouldn't do the right thing.
Now, after our story first appeared on CNBC.com this morning, Morgan Stanley responded with a new statement noting that the fraud committed by Sean Good was conducted outside firm systems and involved transfers to Good that were made from client accounts held elsewhere. The firm also notes that it has a settlement agreement in principle now with Caitlin Andrews and her mother, who also lost everything, and says the firm is working with all clients who've raised claims to amicably resolve them. Now, multiple victims tell us that not only did Morgan Stanley resist paying them, they say the firm has attempted to hold them to those loans that Sean Good convinced them to take out, including charging interest. Now, the judge did order Sean Good to pay $3.6 million in restitution, most of which prosecutors say he doesn't have. They say Sean Good stole around $7 million from Morgan Stanley clients. Morgan Stanley made about $11 billion in profits last year. Brian?